Hi everyone, Kendall here for the last installment of our What's in Your Closet Sew-Along, which has been hosted by Pat Sloan at her website, ilovetomakequilts.com. Stay tuned to the end of this video and I will reveal a couple of surprises for you. Well, one's not a surprise because you've seen me make it, but I have another one to show you at the end of this video. This week's theme is wedding gowns and tuxes. Personally, I don't have any wedding gowns in my closet. No. Just a couple of suits that would no longer go anywhere near this large frame of mine. Maybe one day, hey? People are jealous that I still fit into the earrings I wore in high school, so who can say? If you haven't done so already, jump over to Pat's website, download this week's free pattern, come back here, and I'll show you how I do it. As you will see in the top left-hand corner there, I did make a change to how I am completing this block, in that I have replaced two of the light squares with dark fabric, and I'm making the large pinwheel in a light fabric instead of dark, just to simply maintain my red, white and blue theme that has carried throughout my entire quilt. So I'm treating those two dark squares as if they are the light squares for the half square triangles. So instead of cutting 4 lights, I cut 2 lights and the 2 dark, and I am going to commence making the half square triangles. To do this, we just need to draw a diagonal line in one direction on the back of both of our light squares, and in my case I'm going to take 2 of the medium squares to draw the line because it'll be easier for me to see. We then need to match these right sides together with the remaining 6-inch squares and take those to the machine and stitch 1/4 inch on each side of our drawn line. With our stitching now done, I just like to give these a quick press first to settle those stitches into the fabric and set the seams before cutting these in half along our drawn line. We then need to return to the pressing mat and press all of these to the darker of the 2 fabrics. So in my case, where I have the medium and the dark fabric, I will go towards that dark blue instead of the red, but for the other ones, just towards the red fabric, away from the background fabric. Now, in case you are not aware, the reason we press towards the darker of the 2 fabrics is to prevent shadowing once the block is all together. And what that means is simply that the seam allowance may show through your fabric underneath if pressed to the lighter fabric from a dark one. So we just press to the dark side to try and avoid that. Once we have all of these pressed towards the darker of the 2 fabrics, we do need to trim them down, and let's see how I do that. Okay, so I looked ahead and, I've already done this before, like back in February when I filmed the video, so I'm bringing in my trusty rotating mat, but you'll see that I do not have my makeshift block lock this time because my makeshift block lock was on my 3.5-inch trim down square. I need to use the 6.5-inch square for this one because we are trimming down to 5.5 inches. So I don't have the line of painter's tape on this one, so I'm returning to my 2 at a time method. We have to make sure that we butt that seam allowance up, our opposing seams, nice and tightly for the 2 at a time method. Then we place our ruler on there, making sure our diagonal from the ruler is on our stitching line. We then need to check that we have enough fabric outside the trim down measurement of 5.5 inches on all 4 sides before we trim those first 2 sides. We then rotate the block and we once again line up our diagonal on our stitching line. We then can put our trim down measurement on those freshly cut edges of 5.5 to trim the remaining 2 sides. We will do this for all of our half square triangles, and then we can progress to our next step. Notice there, even though I've cut out a great big patch in the middle, that I had to go back to doing these one at a time, just using that same method, because when I was putting them together, it wasn't clear that I was going to get the right size out of both. So sometimes the 2 at a time method doesn't work, and you do need to return to trimming your half square triangles individually, and that's okay. Now that we have all of our half square triangles trimmed to perfection by either the 2 at a time method, if that was going to work for us, or individually as per, traditional style, we can move on to doing a sew and flip on our large light rectangles. We need to put this sew and flip in the top right hand corner, and as you are aware, there are many different ways to do these sew and flip corners, or easy corner triangles, or snowballing, whatever you want to call it. Today though, I'm choosing to use my normal, it's just a 1 by 12 inch ruler, but the most important thing is that it has a 1/4 inch line on it. We line that 1/4 inch mark up with the 2 corners of our smaller square that we've placed on the top right hand corner of our large light rectangle. We trim that fabric off and we take it to the machine and sew our 1/4 inch seam. You know that normally I would use my folded corner clipper, but sometimes I like to change it up, and on this particular day the folded corner clipper tool was not within my reach. We're then going to take these to the pressing mat and press all of those to the dark side. We're then going to do one more little bit of unit construction before we can work towards finalizing this block. It's time now to grab in our half square triangles that we created earlier and place them in the correct orientation. Basically, we want to make a large parallelogram with our light triangles and keeping that dark fabric towards the center in my case. So pay careful attention to the pattern, and in my example here, the light fabric the medium fabric represents the shaded part on Pat's actual pattern. So we're going to create these units by placing them, as you can see here, and sewing our 1/4 inch on each of these. Those units now sewn, we just need to clip them all apart, and as I'm clipping them apart, I'm also snipping into my seam allowance, so down to but not through the stitching line in the center of this seam, and that's so when we take them to the pressing mat in just a moment, we can push those seam allowances in the direction that we want them to go. So that is because we have the opposing corners of our half square triangles here, we want to press those in the direction of least resistance. So as you can see on the left there, it's going down, and on the right it's going up, and that little snip in the middle allows us to do that, and that gives us nice flat intersections that will help with the final outcome of the block. So we're going to press all of those, and then we need to add that large light rectangle to the top of each of these units, as you see that one at the top of the screen laying. as I said before, we just need to add our large light rectangle that had our sew and flip on to these now, making sure that we maintain our correct orientation. So we'll just stitch this on with 1/4 of an inch, and then we'll press all of these out towards that solid light rectangle, and then we can lay out the final block, which goes together as a simple 4-patch. We now just need to lay this block out, and you will see that my little area here isn't quite large enough for you to take in the whole block, but the idea will be the same regardless. And you'll notice that if you followed my pressing instructions, not injections, my goodness, that all of these seams will nest at every intersection. So we're going to start by doing the 2 vertical seams and then a final horizontal seam. Once we do these 2 vertical seams, we just press in a direction, and we make sure that we press in that same direction on the other half before progressing to our horizontal seam. And once again, everything across the center will nest. I do believe, but let's wait and see, that I also spin that center seam to reduce as much bulk as we can. But stay tuned and we'll see if that's what I do. With that seam sewn, our block is essentially complete, but I do indeed swirl this center. So I am just going to, in a moment, zoom you in and show you what I do. Essentially, all you have to do is just, in most instances, pick out those few stitches which are above your seam line that you just made, and this allows us to spread the fabric apart. So you'll see me here, just pick out those few stitches that are above that horizontal line that we just did. Sometimes it's a bit of a struggle, sometimes you can't get them all, and other times it comes out quite easily. We now just need to give the center there a twist and make sure that all of our seam allowances are going in the same direction. In my instance this time it is clockwise. We may need to put a couple of snips in just to keep our previously done seam allowances going in the same direction, and then you just give this a final press all into place, and the block for this week is done. So everyone, that is the final block for the What's in Your Closet Sew Along, and as promised at the beginning, here are the 2 quilts that I completed throughout this sew along. Of course, you saw me put together the red, white and blue one, which I have completely quilted and bound. I found a beautiful variegated red, white and blue thread from Aurifil to actually quilt it with so that I could keep with my red, white and blue theme. The first one that you have been looking at, but the second one that I'm talking about, let's talk about confusion much. has been done with a fabric line called Gala, which was from Wyndham Fabrics. And I've had that fabric in my stash for quite some time, and I thought, why not use it to make a second version of this fantastic quilt that Pat has given us. Now that we have finished this What's in Your Closet sew-along, I will be hosting my own little sew-along in between the 2 lots of Block Wednesdays that are being run by Pat. So look at For My Community tab for more details on the Butterfly Garden sew-along, which I will be hosting starting from the 18th of May. That's it for this week. I'll see you all again real soon. Bye for now.